I just figured out why the cat likes me. It's because I transcend society, money. It's not about me, but all I can really speak for is me, myself. Just trying to talk and then I end up learning about the grammar. Right, here we go. This comment pissed everyone off except for one person. I wrote kind of poetically, no capital letters and no punctuation. It says fake comedians who are actually modern day COINTELPRO. I think that was Placone on Graham Elwood. Yeah, right. I mean, to be a comedian, one must be funny. Here we go. Goodman's now ginning up and doubling it down with a second video on What's Her Face. And again, he misspells her last name. There's two L's on that, right? If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But if I'm right, then what the hell's his problem? Why is he misspelling that? Okay, here are a couple comments I left for Franco, and then I deleted them. Sometimes I delete what I write. I like self-censor. Military shills posing as citizen journalists tend to be drug addicts with tardive dyskinesia. The same names are mentioned by every show because it is an extremely arrogant astroturfing campaign lacking nuance or expectation of anyone noticing how fake it is. Oh, look, it's the Assange vigil. And there's the woman who we saw at the protest in the upper right corner. I didn't have to watch much before she revealed that she's from the military, or at least her parents. And then she also said some other stuff about the military, and you can kind of see why maybe someone like myself thinks this is a psyop to see if there are any left-leaning or libertarian people in the military who might become the next Snowden or might become the next Chelsea Manning. And that's what this is. They don't fool me. And it really did help that I knew that backstory with H.A. Goodman, Breitbart Unmasked. It does help that I have experience in this area of internet convolution. It helps that I found Ebon Kim and Manitalk and Redneckonomics. It's their fault that they make it so obvious. It wasn't rocket science to tie Redneckonomics, Ebon Kim, Manitalk to all this other crap. They do it to themselves. That's what they do it to themselves means. Here's Graham Elwood. Had to be about 20. That's about 10 years ago. So Graham Elwood is probably around 30 or 32 years old, and he already pretty much has a dead face. His face is not a good-looking face anymore. He's jutting out his tongue. He's got eyebrow issues. I doubt he was on psychiatric pills because he doesn't seem that to be making those looks when he was in college. So right soon enough after this stuff, he ended up with game shows. He ended up in Afghanistan putting on shows for soldiers. So this is not some conspiracy theory to say that Graham Elwood and Jimmy Dore are COINTELPRO agents. They're disinfo, they are military shills. They connected themselves, Elwood connected himself to Mitchell Helt. I didn't do that. And there's DB Cooper, which means that's just the next screenshot. That means I'm done with the screenshot presentation. I suppose I should add in the Lewis Mumford stuff if I haven't already. I'll add that in. And especially, I'll add in some of that Schopenhauer talking about noise issues. That guy had Asperger's. That's my scoop. I start singing, then all these other shows start singing. I come up with a scoop here, scoop over there. I say, like, it's my scoop. Then all of a sudden they're like, oh, it's the Scoop Gang. Right, they're not mimicking me. It's got nothing to do with me. I didn't expose Brett Chamberlain. That never happened. H.A. Goodman wasn't exposed as being involved in that racket. That was COINTELPRO. They were Cybersmear, myself, Mike Stack, Aaron, what's his name? Worthing was his fake name. Aaron, I forget his last name. Aaron Walker. A nutty guy, but I could never put it together. He might be the real deal as a kook. He was just a little too good at the role. Mandy Nagy was probably a kook. The right-wing element of kook. She didn't seem like COINTELPRO. Reinhardt, I would guess, is COINTELPRO. I mean, he had to be.
Because I keep having in my mind, well, if only they knew, if only they knew. But I'm also like, I don't think that would do much either, because I was refreshing my mind on the timelines and info about the case, and I just can't believe there are people who are really saying he's yeah, he should stay locked up. Or with Chelsea Manning, like, yeah, she should go to jail. And a lot of those people are just upset people who do not like trans people, but and who are like military hawks and people who that's sort of what I grew up around. Like in this area, like I live in Northern Virginia, like it's I
Yeah.
don't know what to do. Like, and I've been in this area for most of my life. I grew up with two military officer parents, and a line of that, and it's just I don't. I remember, actually, you know what I'll say? I remember when there's a distinct memory of mine, and that was sort of a political awakening when I knew I was different from my parents. When I knew I was like, oh, we're not on the same page here.
The White House and the Pentagon control our opinions and control the information we need to form opinions of our own. Therefore, we have no real opinions of our own unless we are very sober and keep away from newspapers and television programs and radio programs long enough to think our own thoughts. We'll use them as instruments of thinking.
You once warned against the arrival of great instruments of persuasion and intellectual bribery.
Maybe Mandy was COINTELPRO and Walker, but I don't think everyone is COINTELPRO. But I do in regards to Elwood, Dore, Goodman, Tim Pool. What's pretty bizarre about this whole situation to myself is when you look at it on the individual level. So you have this young African American woman who's a new TV show personality for the Military Show Network. She's talking about the individual. She's saying it's now time to let the individual be courageous or something like that. Hopefully, just putting this stuff together, it synthesizes itself and makes sense to the viewer. My background is in social theory. Studied Eric Fromm and others. I don't just say stuff to say it, and I do have an extensive resume at this point of scoops. I had the Hilaria Baldwin scoop in regards to YouTube. It wasn't a scoop, but I think I had the first legit TV show episode for YouTube in regards to Hilaria Baldwin. I got 17,000 views.
Studies in Pessimism by Arthur Schopenhauer. Chapter 8. On Noise. Kant wrote a treatise on the vital powers. I should prefer to write a dirge for them. The superabundant display of vitality, which takes the form of knocking, hammering, and tumbling things about, has proved a daily torment to me all my life long. There are people, it is true, nay, a great many people, who smile at such things, because they are not sensitive to noise. But they are just the people who are also not sensitive to argument, or thought, or poetry, or art. In a word, to any kind of intellectual influence. The reason of it is that the tissue of their brains is of a very rough and coarse quality. On the other hand, noise is a torture to intellectual people. In the biographies of almost all great writers, or wherever else their personal utterances are recorded, I find complaints about it. In the case of Kant, for instance, Goethe, Lichtenberg, Jean Paul. And if it should happen that any writer has omitted to express himself on the matter, it is only for want of an opportunity. This aversion to noise I should explain as follows. If you cut up a large diamond into little bits, it will entirely lose the value it had as a whole, and an army, divided up into small bodies of soldiers, loses all its strength. So, a great intellect sinks to the level of an ordinary one. As soon as it is interrupted and disturbed, its attention distracted and drawn off from the matter in hand. for its superiority depends upon its power of concentration, of bringing all its strength to bear upon one theme, in the same way as a concave mirror collects into one point all the rays of light that strike upon it. Noisy interruption is a hindrance to this concentration. That is why distinguished minds have always shown such an extreme dislike to disturbance in any form, as something that breaks in upon and distracts their thoughts. Above all have they been averse to that violent interruption that comes from noise. Ordinary people are not much put out by anything of the sort. The most sensible and intelligent of all nations in Europe lays down the rule, never interrupt, as the 11th commandment. Noise is the most impertinent of all forms of interruption. It is not only an interruption, but also a disruption of thought. Of course, where there's nothing to interrupt, noise will not be so particularly painful. Occasionally it happens that some slight but constant noise continues to bother and distract me for a time before I become distinctly conscious of it. All I feel is a steady increase in the labor of thinking, just as though I were trying to walk with a weight on my foot. At last I find out what it is. Let me now, however, pass from genus to species. The most inexcusable and disgraceful of all noises is the cracking of whips, a truly infernal thing when it is done in the narrow, resounding streets of a town. I denounce it as making a peaceful life impossible. It puts an end to all quiet thought. That this cracking of whips should be allowed at all seems to me to show in the clearest way how senseless and thoughtless is the nature of mankind. No one with anything like an idea in his head can avoid a feeling of actual pain at this sudden sharp crack which paralyzes the brain, rends the thread of reflection, and murders thought. Every time this noise is made, it must disturb 100 people who are applying their minds to business of some sort, no matter how trivial it may be, while on the thinker its effect is woeful and disastrous, cutting his thoughts asunder, much as the executioner's axe severs the head from the body. No sound, be it ever so shrill, cuts so sharply into the brain as this cursed cracking of whips. You feel the sting of the lash right inside your head, and it affects the brain in the same way as touch affects a sensitive plant, and for the same length of time. With all due respect for the most holy doctrine of utility, I really cannot see why a fellow who is taking away a wagon-load of gravel or dung should thereby obtain the right to kill in the bud the thoughts which may happen to be springing up in 10,000 heads, the number he will disturb one after another in half an hour's drive through the town. Hammering, the barking of dogs, and the crying of children are horrible to bear, but your only genuine assassin of thought is the crack of a whip. It exists for the purpose of destroying every pleasant moment of quiet thought that anyone may now and then enjoy. If the driver had no other way of urging on his horse than by making this most abominable of all noises, it would be excusable, but quite the contrary is the case. This cursed cracking of whips is not only unnecessary, but even useless. Its aim is to produce an effect upon the intelligence of the horse, but through the constant abuse of it, the animal becomes habituated to the sound, which falls upon blunted feelings and produces no effect at all. The horse does not go any faster for it. You have a remarkable example of this in the ceaseless cracking of his whip on the part of a cab driver, while he is proceeding at a slow pace on the lookout for a fare. If he were to give his horse the slightest touch with the whip, it would have much more effect.